so I don't forget. Okay. Okay, so thoughts on the homework, on the experiment? Any any thoughts on it from anybody? Did you think it was hard? Was it easy? I'm not saying that it was easy, but what was feedback?
Yeah,
You guys did a great job, and there were a lot of different experiments. Everybody took like
I
a different
can,
approach. So
my reaction, I sent it over an email, but it was tough for me because I found myself in this just loop of, okay, well, where do the experiments fit in on one stage? Oh, okay, well, what are the stages? Well, there's no set defined stage. The stages are what you make them. Okay, well, what experiments fit in? Okay, well, I don't know what the stages are. So I spent too much time stuck in that. And then the bank work people will appreciate this. My computer decided to do a refresh on my Friday time block when I decided to do all of my homework. So then I just had to stop thinking about it until a couple days later and figure it out. So that it was tricky for me.
yep, I understand you weren't the only person who provided that feedback as well. Others? Yeah.
Yeah, same as Riley for sure. It's like you think you know where you're gonna do it, but then you start kind of giving yourself all these other scenarios and seeing reasons why it would fit somewhere else, or maybe why it wouldn't work there. So definitely kind of have the same feelings there, but appreciate like your feedback and everything because it was all really helpful.
Anybody else? Go ahead. Laura, you're on mute. Yeah.
I was about to sneeze, so I put you on mute. um, I was just gonna say, so I get stuck in these modes of I think of things from a research perspective, and this wasn't really research. It was more like, I mean, I'm assuming like would a company generally do this internally and have their like analytics team measure?
It depends.
Okay. So I'm thinking about things like, the way that I approached mine was like if I did an email marketing campaign and one of my experiments was changing the subject line of the
Mhm.
email. Like that's not something you would measure through research necessarily. I mean, I suppose you could, but I was thinking more that you would look to see, you could see what percentage of people opened with this subject
Yep.
line versus
Mhm.
that subject line. So
Yeah.
what group generally tracks that sort of
Well,
thing? Or
it
do you hire?
depends. It depends. You might
Okay.
do it internally if there was an analytics team or a direct marketing team or something like that. You might have an external partner.
Mhm.
But most likely, as or hopefully, as as a research partner to your marketing teams, you might have a say in what the experiments are if it was outside of like the research world, right? Because
Mhm.
as you're starting to fine tune an approach, you don't want to be duplicative. And hopefully you're not just getting, okay, go do one of these and come back and tell me what the answer is. So the idea is that hopefully, as you think about the full plan of research or all of the different pieces, this might be a piece that you would partner on with your marketing team, or that as a research person, you might actually run yourself, depending upon the scope of your role, right? So I know I'll just speak for myself. So in one of my roles when I was at Unilever, we would have handled this. This would have been what you're talking about, Lori, and the email marketing, right? For example, that would have fallen in the scope of my go to market research team, right? And what we would have done is we would have said, okay, let us design this properly. We will work with an outside agency, whoever it happens to be. Maybe it's a communications agency or whatever, direct marketing agency, if that we did the same kind of experiment you had said, and we would have managed it with them and we would have collaborated on the results.
So how do they actually measure though? I guess that's where I'm confused. Like, how do they
It may be
know?
click-throughs. So what'll happen is if, let's say we did the thing that you're saying with emails, right?
Yeah.
They can, there's a way to measure if people actually open emails and if they
Yeah.
click through the links and things like that. So it's easy enough to do.
Okay. So, but is there software that does that? That's what I'm confused about.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
how do
So
they?
right,
Okay.
there's software that does that, right? It's the
Okay.
same as if there's someone else in one of their experiments we were talking about, like if you had a mock-up of a website, right? And you had people and you put an ad out on a website, right? That you controlled the environment. It wasn't like random type into Google Hasbro, right? You basically had a controlled environment, but it was a real mock-up. Companies, there are research companies that you can partner with who can track people's path and what they click on through that, and you can see how many people, where they go, how many people click on the your ad versus maybe you'd test multiple ads. You'd have like 4 environments, right? But the same audience. You'd keep the audience constant, but you'd have 4 different environments, right? And you'd see which one people click on the most, and you'd control it. And the maybe the metric you'll be using is a click through. And Patty, any comments on that? Because Kantar does happen to do this.
Yeah, so the way most agencies do this is there's consented panels. So you have a panel of people who have consented to participate in this kind of research, and through that you're able to essentially, as Deb said, track their navigation, track their ad exposure, understand what they've seen, and how they're actually navigating. So there's different use case applications of that, but that's in a nutshell how that type of research is typically conducted.
Yep, and you can track. It's great for path to purchase, as part of that, because you can start to see how people, as Patty was saying, navigate different things and where they click and what they don't click on, things like that. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I had a question that's stemming from that. How do you, if this is something either you're outsourcing to a vendor to do an experiment, or an experiment you're doing in-house on the research team, I'm thinking of it in like a business partner point of view. If I'm giving you a research budget, how am I justifying the cost of an experiment if it's something that's like, what email, the image do I use? Or I don't know, the experiment's just like, I did a neuro test for my experiment because it's something that would have benefit, but how are we measuring the incremental lift that the experiment's giving us? Like if we went this way versus this way, whatever the output of our experiment is, the choice that we made is making us X% more for our total sales or something. It's like, how are we measuring the added value of the experiment?
Do you mean the justification for the spend on the experiment? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, if I'm spending $100,000 to do a neuro experiment and I'm deciding it's going to be an input of the content for my commercial, right? That was my example. If that's only going to make us 1% more in total sales, like how is it worth it?
Well, so typically what will happen is in the world outside of the research plans that we're putting together, where we haven't put budget limitations on ourselves, right? We will have a set budget, right? And as we are doing in our research plan, we will decide what our objectives are, right? And what we need to learn. And typically, what I always suggest is that, for my teams, I have always suggested, decide what things are the riskiest things you can't decide on your own, right? And what do you think the tools and approaches are that you think will help you learn the most for your money, right? Sometimes we'll experiment, right? We will use neuro. It depends. I mean, I love neuro for communication because I think it gives you something that you don't get from just a straight up quant test. So I think it's great. But I think that there are a lot of times, if you're going to go test pricing and you're going to throw it in a quant test, I'd say that's not a good use of money, right? Go do a conjoint, right? I'm just, as an example. So what are the appropriate ways to evaluate and answer the questions you have, especially on the things that are the riskiest? So when you have budget limitations and you say, crap, I only have $5 and I have 20 questions. The way I decide what to do is I rank them in terms of first of all, what are the biggest gaps, right? What do I have to know? And then what are the biggest risks? If I don't know this, what would the risk be, right? If I don't know it. Because sometimes you might be able to look at other research that's been done, or even desk research, find something, if you Google it or something like that, educated guess, maybe you know a lot about your consumers, kind of guess it. You might be able to let that go, but sometimes you have to have an answer to something, right? Because maybe if you're working in the world of CPG, you need to have a number to walk into a retailer, right? Maybe you need a number for a claim in advertising. It depends. But there are certain things, like for me, that are, and this is a separate topic, that would be non-negotiable, where I would always have to test something because I feel like the risk is very high. And that's in terms of product performance, right? Because you put a new product in a packaging, and if it doesn't work, you are royally screwed. Okay. So, to me, those are the kinds of things that are non-negotiable. Communication, got to have some sort of evaluation somewhere, right? I've seen people launch with just qualitative, right? Typically, most people will do quantitative and a drop of qual if they have budget constraints, just so that they can validate it in some way. Does that help,
Mhm.
Riley? That was a long answer.
Yeah.
Question.
No, that helps.
Okay. Any other questions? I wanted to talk about two things before I turn it over to Patty, and Patty's going to talk about campaign measurement. So, the first thing is in terms of the final project. Okay, so I'm going to spend a few minutes on it. Based on some of the questions that many of you asked over the past week, I made a few tweaks to the learning plan, kind of outline that I shared last week, and I'm going to share that with you in a minute. And a couple things I just want to say in terms of the project. You don't have to, as I said, you don't have to put costs in. Don't worry about the amount of time. I mean, it's great to know that. And if you want to, you can, but I won't penalize you if you don't. And I don't want you to worry about it. Okay. Because I know that adds extra time, especially if you feel that you're going to build a timeline. It's okay. I want to know that you understand how to get from the beginning and what needs to happen at all of the stages of developing communication and getting it into market, and that iterative effect that we're going to talk about in terms of campaign measurement, so you can continuously make it better and have that continuous loop of learning. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so I'm going to just pop this up for a minute. It's the same thing we've been looking at. I've just updated it, but I do want to just go through a couple things again. The other thing I do want to say is that I know there were a number of questions about research stages. And just, and Riley said this, but it's, there are general ideas of the research stages you want to go through, but there is not a mandate on which research stages you should be looking at for this. Okay. It's not like, okay, stage 1 is this, stage 2 is this. You can name them whatever you want. You just need to get through a process of figuring out who you're going to talk to, what you're going to say, why, get the creative evaluated in some way, and then get it out the door, and then do some sort of iterative process. So let me just show you a couple things. So, oh, come on. I'm not sure if this is helpful, but
Can I clarify something? This is Lena.
yes.
So when you're saying get the creative evaluated, we can choose the variables that we want to evaluate and test on. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be like, because I've never tested creative before.
Yep.
So it's like, is there a minimum number of variables for the creative that you want us to test on? Okay.
No, not at all. So let's just say, let's jump to that for a minute, Lena. Let's just say we get to, I don't want to jump around too much, but let's just say we're on step 4, which is understand what's working and not, these are just the steps that I wrote out, right? And I did fine tune this a little bit based on questions people asked this week. You can do anything you want. You can do a quantitative test where you take a couple of ads, you put them in kind of an in context type of, maybe you have a finished advertising reel and you test it with consumers. You see what their reaction is. You see what they think about the brand. You don't have to know those kinds of details. Don't worry about it because there's nothing in the video content and we haven't gone into the details of that. If you know, that's great. Okay. If you don't, this is the place that I would quantitatively test my advertising. I want to know if it appeals to consumers and what they think of it. And I want to make sure my message gets across. That's really what we're looking to do. Okay. Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. So there's some general questions, just overall questions that we should all be thinking about when you think about doing this. So getting from, the point of who should I speak to? Who is that? Who's my target or targets going to be? Who will they be? What am I going to say? And why would I say that? Where should I say it? And when should I say it? Right? Those are basically the questions that we need to be able to answer overall. And I know on page 6 here, these are the questions that we did, put together last week, but they all pretty much would fall into kind of these macro categories. They'd be subsets of that, right? And as you think about everything that we've done now through, the past 6 weeks, we've looked at who should I speak to, right? So we've got 0-party data and first-party data, and we can do qualitative, we can mine the data that we have. What should I say to them? Well, we probably have some ideas about our game on what we should say, and we can see if that's appealing, and we could learn more about our people by connecting second-party data or third-party data, or again, qualitative or quantitative. Where should I say it? You might learn that. We'd learn that through the 0-party or first-party data in some of the primary research we've done with people, right? When should I say it? We might have learned it there as well. So this is these are more macro kind of buckets, but if you're just struggling with, okay, where should I start? This would be where I would start. And then I would think about, okay, just taking that a step further. Now, I'm using the word steps. I know in the homework it says stages. Just consider them the same things, okay? Again, what do we already know? Now, someone asked me about this, and I'm going to explain this just a little bit further. You're not going to go off and do new research for this. It's kind of, for me, a research hygiene thing, if you will. So I always feel that before I go off and spend money or time on new research, I want to make sure that I already know what I know or what other people know, right? So probably go off and read studies that have been already done by people prior to me, on this topic or a brand or whatever it is, and just make notes and then say, okay, so this is great, but I still have a lot of gaps of questions. And my original questions hold, or I have 10 new questions to add because this has raised new questions in my head, right? So I like to ground myself in that kind of stuff. And then I always like to figure out, okay, who am I going to speak to? And what can I learn about them? I want to know about their habits, their attitudes, right? And a subset of this is identifying the core target audience. And these are just the steps I put together. You could have any steps you want. I put them out there because of the confusion of, not clear there. It's making sure that it's clear what a step is. You can define them however you want. There is not a right or wrong. I just wanted everybody to have examples. You can feel free to use these, but you can do whatever you want. There is not a right or wrong. This is my example. So then, you do something like this. Maybe this is qualitative in some of the 0-party. And then step 3, better understand the communication, right? So this might be an experiment, right? Maybe some sort of A/B test, or maybe it's a multivariable type of a thing where I have a lot of different things I could put in my communication, including claims, and other types of things. And maybe I'd run some sort of analytic approach here, right? And then
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Debbie. So I have to assume that stuff that we've already been doing through this whole class, like can we use that
Yes.
as the example?
absolutely.
Okay.
Kelly, those were, yes. So thank you for saying that, because you've done all of these pieces so far, right? So think of those
Yeah.
as they are the modules. You can basically plug and play those babies right into this. Okay. No
Okay.
need to recreate stuff. Okay. No need at all. What's working and not working in your creative approach. Some people had experiments in this phase. There were some experiments from people in fine-tuning executional details like media channels and retail. And today we're going to talk about launch and measure. Does that make sense? And is that helpful? Especially if there's anyone who wasn't clear on what the steps and stages are. And I'll send this out shortly as soon as we're done. Yes, no?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it helps.
Okay. Okay. And if not, I'm easy enough to get a hold of. And again, I'm happy to help in any way and spend time, and we can chat through stuff. Okay. All good then? Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to spend some time talking about what happens when we launch our advertising and how we measure that. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so Patty can share. And I'm going to have Patty introduce herself. And we're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so just talking about different approaches on measurement, because that's kind of the final piece to our research plan. Patty, I'm going to turn it over to you. And for all of us, for our class, I'll speak for Patty, so sorry, but just jump right in, okay?
Yes,
Questions?
100%.
Okay, I'm gonna
So
put myself on mute.
thank you everyone for having me here today. Really happy to be with you tonight. I just want to do a quick check that you can see my full screen. You should see a page that says campaign. Great. Excellent. So as Deb kindly introduced me at the beginning, I'm Patty Gregory. I'm a VP of Analytics at Kantar. I've been here almost 5 years, have spent my career with various agency suppliers, working across all kinds of different analytic tools and techniques, but I have a particular love and passion for all things related to marketing effectiveness and marketing effectiveness measurement. And so this is why Deb has asked me to be with you tonight and talk a little bit about, some of the tools and capabilities and their applications to help you navigate this space. And as she mentioned, by all means, stop me, ask questions. Happy to keep this as interactive as we'd like so that you get what you need out of our time together. So before we sort of deep dive into some particular tools and techniques, I wanted to give sort of a big picture lay of the land. So I'm sharing this framework to help us sort of think about how to navigate a campaign. So in a very simple way, we have to think about, before we even have a campaign, what are the things we need to do to make sure that we've got the right concepts and ideas, that they're optimized, that we've turned those ideas into an actual finished film. And there's qualitative research and testing tools that we can do to help with that. We'll talk a little bit about the ad testing tools here today in particular. And then there's during the campaign. So you've got an ad, you've got a campaign, you feel great about it, you put it out into the market. What are the things you can do to sort of optimize the content as you're running in as close to real time as you can, so you can sort of tweak as you go. And there are solutions that we'll talk about today, particular brand lift and multi-touch attribution, abbreviated here, MTA. There's a glossary in the back, which is just sort of a jargon buster sheet that you'll see that sort of just spells out in words any abbreviations that I'm using here. So you'll have that for reference. And last but not least, post-campaign. So the thing is over and you want to know how did it do, right? And you want to know that because you want to make better decisions the next time you need to air something, or you're maybe going to continue another wave of that campaign and you want to see if there are tweaks you can make. So post-campaign, we use a number of tools that help us measure the impact. And again, brand lift and MTA, but we're also going to introduce marketing mix modeling, or MMM here. And then ad awareness tracking, which we won't talk about today, but at its most basic, is a technique that you can use to understand whether people are actually noticing and remembering your ad after it aired. I should mention that, so Deb said I was with Kantar. I am here representing, not Kantar, but sort of representing general knowledge. So I'm trying to avoid using any brand name things. So I'm going to talk about everything in its most generic vanilla term that I can, so that you can navigate as you're talking and working with different agency suppliers. And similarly, I'm going to talk a little bit about different tools and techniques, but it's not going to be methodology heavy. The particular secret sauce that different agencies use will vary agency to agency. What I want to get across is sort of the concepts of what these things are and when to use them and how to use them. So creative quality, right? This is the foundation, and it's probably obvious, but it's even more important than people think it is. So what this chart is showing us to the right, this is how important marketers think creative quality is. So they'd rank it as sort of the fourth most important thing. Well, in reality, if we sort of look at what drives your profitability of your advertising, it'd be number 2. So super, super important and controllable, right? So this is the thing that as marketers, we have the opportunity to make sure we get right before we air an ad. So the main sort of metrics that people are measuring when they're doing testing is the ad engaging? Does the ad communicate the associations I want it to with my brand? Does the ad associate with my brand at all? And is the ad encouraging purchase or building equity? Broadly speaking, these are the 3 main buckets of things that people want to know when they test. Now, traditionally, creative testing involves recruiting a sample of people, exposing them to an ad, having them answer questions about it. That's what it is at its most basic. There are other techniques out there, but that's the sort of basic that's been around for a really long time. And it's been around for a really long time because it's validated and proven and works. But there's new emerging tools, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But one thing that's making that traditional testing faster, easier, and more cost-effective is self-service platforms that have sort of standardized the process. So there's a lot of like DIY options where you can sort of go in and say, this is who I want in my sample, and this is the standardized questions I want to ask them, and you could turn that around very quickly. Now, what's coming, right? I can't talk about measurement without talking about AI, right? That is in everyone's everyone's mind, and it's on everyone's mind for a good reason. It really enables you to do certain things better, but it's not a full-on replacement. So in this example, and this is based on an article that we had contributed to at Kantar, our point of view is that you really need to match the technique to the use case. So if you really want to understand, in an early stage, or you want to understand, which finished film is going to get you the most bang for your buck, and you want to go deep on the diagnostics, traditional survey does that tremendously well. If you have 7 different versions or 10 different versions of an ad, and you want to just quickly see which one bubbles to the top, so you know which one to move forward with, in an animatic version, not even a finished film, AI is amazing for that. If you want to understand how your competitors are doing, again, AI is amazing for that because you can, scrape their ads and you could test at scale and you could do a meta-analysis of what works for my category, not just what works for me. Actually, I'm going to pause for a minute before I move on to talk about more of the sort of campaign post-measurement sort of things. Any questions about ad testing in general?
I have a question. In terms of different channels, so if you were, say, traditional TV versus Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, whatever it might be, is there any methodology that you would shift based off of the different channels, even though the content might be somewhat similar?
Yeah, so ads can be tested in context. So there are techniques that can be used. Deb actually alluded to one of them, right, where you sort of mock up a site, but also even within AI applications, we've got AI engines now that are trained on this is a Facebook ad and how it performs relative to Facebook versus an Instagram ad versus a YouTube ad versus a TikTok ad. So I would say context does matter, and certainly digital versus TV you want to treat differently. Whether you're doing traditional research or you're doing, an AI-based approach, you want to think about those a little bit differently.
Thank you.
Sure. I should also mention with digital, you usually get behavioral metrics. So did people watch the whole thing? Did they skip it? Things that are meaningful and relevant in a digital context that obviously, you can't know for TV. Great question. Okay, so when it comes to, so now you have a fabulous ad, you've tested it, you're moving forward with the right assets in the right media channels, you're good to go. So what are some of the things you want to know after the ad has aired or while it's airing? So first you want to know, is it working? Is it delivering results? And that could be, based on the KPIs that you've established, sales lift, brand lift, etc. How can I make my marketing and media budget deliver better results? If I had to cut, where should I cut to minimize the impact to my business? I get money from the sky, I get a windfall to my budget, where should I invest my next dollar? What's the ROI of marketing and media expenditure? So really useful when you're trying to make the case for investing in the brand for the next quarter or for the next year. You'll need to prove out that what you've been doing is benefiting the business and that you're using the company's money wisely. And then how do you plan and forecast the business results that will come from spending on marketing and media? Oftentimes, if there isn't a discipline around this measurement, there can be skepticism like, I didn't see you ran a TV ad, but I didn't see my share go up this week. So what gives, right? So this is the way to bring analytic discipline and rigor, is to actually measure that. And it has to be measured with a model. You can't just sort of line up your sales data and your TV data and try and sort of sort it out, because there's just too much going on at the same time. And then this has become, a super important question, particularly within the last few years, which has been so volatile between the COVID effects and then the inflationary effects that, we've seen in the market. We had a lot of questions about, marketing is one thing, but what's going on with these macro factors? How are they impacting my business? And how is marketing either working or not working in the context of these other macro things that are going on? So I'm going to talk about 3 sort of main tools that are used to answer some of these questions. And then I'm going to show you a side-by-side grid that will sort of compare and contrast when to use what and why, and what some of the benefits and limitations are. The first is brand lift, and in some ways it's the simplest of the 3 and very useful to understand. I'm running an ad. Did the ad lift certain brand metrics like for example, awareness, brand association, purchase intent, short-term likelihood to buy, those sorts of things. And it's a simple control exposed concept. So you're comparing people who didn't see the ad to people who did see the ad. You're surveying them and you're understanding then whether the exposure of the ad lifted these metrics versus those who didn't see it. Nice, clean, simple tool. Agencies do this, like research agencies do this, but publishers do this as well. So Google and Meta do this on behalf of advertisers that invest up to certain amounts because they want to prove out that the ads that they're running are actually, you know, having an impact. And it's a nice, simple way to do that. There are different flavors of this that get more complicated, cross-channel effects, and there's ways to incorporate sales lift and so forth. But at its most basic, this is it. From there, it gets a little bit more complicated. So the next tool I'll talk about is multi-touch attribution models. Now, these take a lot of different forms and flavors. They range anywhere from, you know, equal distribution of touch points and allocating to different exposures, but the concept is always the same. You start with users, and users are exposed to a sequence of different marketing activity. In this fake example, it's, you know, digital advertising, search, and radio. A little random, but that's the sequence that this particular user was exposed. The next user is exposed to the ads as well, but in a different sequence. And in each case, you're trying to solve for, in aggregate, by looking across lots and lots of users, what is the likelihood that exposure to these things increased the probability to buy my product? And all this is done through analytic modeling. There's a lot of different techniques that are in play here. And I don't want to get too hung up in, you know, what's what. But the point is, it's all within a marketing universe. You can get very granular because you're at the user level. And so there's some advantages to this technique because you can start to understand, you know, how does reach and frequency and the sequence of touch points, and you can get pretty granular and deep here in a way that you can't necessarily with other techniques. And last but not least, and I don't know if you can see, here we go. Last but not least is marketing mix modeling. So the concept behind marketing mix modeling is you're trying to understand how sales change over time as a function of all the things that could affect sales changing over time. So that includes media, if you're in the, you know, a CPG company, or if you're in even a non-CPG, what are the consumer promotions or consumer trade promotions, price discounts, incentives that you're offering people to buy, other marketing events like events or sampling, and then of course these macro factors that we talked about. So you're taking all of that and you're putting that all in the model and you're solving for how each of these things contributes to sales over the long term. So whereas it multi-touch attribution modeling and brand lift, we're looking specifically and laser focusing on media. Here, we're taking a little bit more of a broader view. Questions before I do the sort of text-heavy compare and contrast slide here? Okay. Just want to make sure everyone's, this is all making sense. So here we're summarizing these common tools, BrandLift, MTA, and MMM. And as I had mentioned, for BrandLift, we're primarily focusing on campaign impact. It's usually one campaign at a time. That's one of the limitations, right? It's also typically limited to purchase intent. It's tricky to layer on actual sales outcomes unless you have a data source to do that and can merge the two. But it's very good for individual campaign measurement, and it can be done in flight, which is also useful. For multi-touch attribution, as I mentioned, really good for being able to understand at a granular level the optimization of digital tactics. So the format, the placement, the creative quality, reach, frequency, all of that, and optimizing all of that. The limitation is it does rely on cookies or direct integrations with a publisher. So there's a little bit of a limitation there. And it is a media lens. So, and it's a media lens, and not everything can be measured at a user level. So when it comes to things like out of home and print, you have to rely on, probability that someone was exposed to that. You can't, in a single source way, know for sure what magazine ad someone saw. And last but not least, MMM. So with MMM, again, really good for that holistic understanding of what's driving sales overall. Very good for understanding ROI and optimizing marketing spend. The challenge is it's very data intensive and it's very time intensive. So you need to collect typically 2 to 3 years of weekly sales, all of your media impressions that went to support the business, as well as all of the other external factors. And oftentimes MMMs are missing the lens of what happened with brand metrics. So, did this lift the way people, change the way people think about my brand? Any questions?
Can I just
Yeah.
make a build, Patty? Sorry, Steve, hang on 1 second. Just as you guys are thinking about which tools to use, and these aren't the only 3, as Patty mentioned, there were other tools that were mentioned in the videos from Joe. And I know a number of you have experience in campaign measurement. But just keep in mind what questions you want to answer, because like a brand lift study is for the here and now, right? Where a marketing mix model and MMM is really something you might run, 2 years after the campaign has completed, because you need a certain amount of data, or the campaign has run for 2 years, because you typically need 104 weeks of data to do something like that. Go ahead, Steve. I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah. So I'll see if I can get this question succinct or not. So we use, I guess, a level of MMM in what we do, looking at the uncontrolled and controlled impact. So environment down to media to news, those types of things. What I find is the impact is highly correlated to the size of either the investment or size of the environmental impact, or those types of things, because it's a zero-sum game. So how do we bring in a efficiency measure to look at it within the model? I guess externally you could look at it, but within the model to maybe get like a normative piece about, okay, this size impact is typical or outsized relative to what we're seeing with these kind of impacts.
Are you doing the modeling yourself in-house?
Oh no, we're externally, and
Okay. No, the reason I ask, I'm not trying to be nosy. I'm asking because agencies often will have benchmarks that they can lean on. So this is what sort of the typical ROI is, or the typical effectiveness is for this media vehicle, for this vertical, whatever your vertical you compete is. I don't know what company you're with.
Yeah, and I see it, I kind of see it on the back end. So I see the proportional impacts across, and I see that it ebbs and flows with size of investment. And I feel like it's kind of a does story, because we spend more, media is going to have a greater impact. So I want to get, this, and again, so maybe it's circling back to kind of get that normative measure with it. But what I really want to know is this the expected outcome? Are we indexing at a 10% efficiency level higher than that? Or is our creative suffering, which we do with the ad testing, and our media is impacting at a lower rate, punching out
Yeah.
lower?
Steve, have you asked them to do an efficiency metric for you?
No, I mean, I'm not on the ad
Sorry.
side, so it's just it swirls within my head. I mean, it's like, so a couple of classes I'm taking, I mean, this is one that I want to take at, and I haven't been able to kind of quantify my question in the sense. And another one is going back is from another class to think about like kind of sonic branding, because we really don't test sound in a lot of our creatives, which I think we should. But it's just this piece and efficiency. So it does exist. I just need to press for the answer, is what you're saying.
So I think certainly calculating an ROI or an efficiency is usually pretty standard as an output, providing benchmarks to like what does this look like in the market generally, so you understand, are you over or under. The other thing I will say is sometimes you're your own benchmark, right? So you look at this over time and you understand, am I improving? So a lot of companies will say, you know, I want to get X% better year on year, and they'll set that as a target. And that better doesn't mean I spent more, I got more. Better means more efficient, right? So I did more with the money that I have. So there is a little bit of a I spent more, I got more, if you're spending right. That doesn't always happen. If you spend more, sometimes you spend more and you don't get more because you didn't spend wisely. So the discipline of measurement, if you're always getting more when you're spending more, that's amazing, because that's not typically what you see. You'll typically see some missteps. Either you spent too much in a given channel, or you spent in the wrong way behind the wrong things.
Because there are two pieces, because one, we do kind of projections on some of our KPIs, and we noticed that when we did this projection, we took out our spend equivalent, and it like dropped off in terms of the expected value of the score. But I found that whenever I look at these models and the data, and I'm not looking at the whole equation, so this is me outside looking in, but it seems like whenever you hold something to 0 or at a smaller level, the other aspects kind of fill in the gap in terms of proportional impacts. And I just want to make sure that, you know, I can understand the framing and the context of when it's a usual event and when it's either outside or undersized. So I'll ask questions through our vendor and through the people that handle that. But I just wanted to kind of
Can I ask you a question too, Steve? Do you have in your models, do you layer on awareness or anything like that? You know, or the fact, you know, if people have seen the ads on top of it? Anything?
I don't know
other
if
types of
that's the
metrics?
input within the MMN. I mean, so we do a lot of tests 360, and I mean, Kantar is one of the vendors we use. So Patty, I'll probably go back to you, because I think we've crossed paths before within the work. But it's just, I mean, we look at it. I don't know if we integrate across all our models, and I really don't know all the inputs within the MMM that we look at, but we do have various levels of kind of norms in various inputs throughout. I was just trying to figure out within the MMM context, does efficiency bring in?
Yep, got it. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Jacqueline. So if your brand is doing an MMM study and you have results from previous brand lift studies going back however many years, are you able to kind of like layer them on top or add the brand lift data to the MMM findings, even though they're two different comparison tools and potentially different data sources, or is it more guiding?
Yeah, so it's more convergence of evidence, right? There's not a way to put a brand lift study in an MMM specifically. You can do some tweaking with what we call priors if you're using a Bayesian model. So you could set expectations that based on brand lift, I'm expecting this campaign to work better than that campaign, and constrain things. But typically what we prefer to do is sort of let the data in the model speak, and then look at the results afterwards and say, how does this line up with what we thought we knew about brand lift? And also keeping in mind that brand lift is measuring brand, MMMs are typically measuring sales, and sometimes those things sync up and sometimes they don't, at least not in the short term.
Okay, makes
Does that
sense.
make
Thank
sense?
you. Yes.
Okay, great.
I have a question.
Yeah, go to.
This is Jessie. So I'm involved in both MMN and NTA. And mostly from an NTA perspective, I help gather a lot of the inputs to our simulations, for our KPI outputs. And I feel like both approaches are like very difficult to explain to anyone who is not involved, and even those that are involved, I feel like have a very difficult time explaining it. And they also, I feel like, try to almost use them together. And I'm just curious, like, your perspective on, can you really use them together? And if so, how? And I guess, like, whether you can or can't, how do you like make it easier for people to understand like the impact that they have? I know that's kind of a general question, but it's just something that we run into all the time.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. So I'm going to take those sort of one at a time. The first question, which is, these things are hard to understand and hard to explain. What I like to do is to focus on the KPIs and the output that come out of it and start there, as opposed to starting with, here's the methodology and the technique we use to get to it. So most people understand the concept of ROI, right? We solve for how much sales volume is driven by this particular tactic, and we know how much we spent on it, and so we're able to. So that's a nice starting point, right? And then we know what media has contributed to the business. We know what proportion of our sales it makes up. So when you break it down into some of the building blocks, I think the building blocks get easier for people to understand. And where I find it comes to life, whether it's MTA or MMM, is really in the scenarios and simulations, and working with clients to say, this is what you spent, this is what you got, that's your starting point. Let's see what you could have done differently with that same money. Okay, that's your base scenario case. That's the optimized version. Okay, now let's see what happened if you had a little more money to spend. Where should you add it in? So by doing that and sort of walking through the steps, I think it becomes a little more practical and gets us out of the like philosophical methodology conversations that sometimes people get hung up on. Personally, that's been my experience. I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, I think the challenge is when, and Steve kind of touched on it, it's like, if you try to kind of provide some sort of method of showing somebody like an optimization of how you adjust different variables within the model, it's all these kind of like what ifs, and it's like, it's just challenging. Like, I don't think there's really an answer. I'm not looking necessarily for an exact answer, but it's just something that we've run into, and it's just kind of a constant battle that we have.
I would encourage you, because I don't like the super theoretical what ifs either. I like the practical. I'm deciding whether or not to invest in this. Is it a good idea or not? Or I have, I want to spend more money on that. Is it a good idea? Like, and have the agency run that scenario for you versus something theoretical, hypothetical that they come up with. If you're using it to actually make a real decision, it becomes easier to understand how the model works and what the trade-offs are that it's making, and to drill into the reasons why. And sometimes I think walking through the story of why that works better gets you to a more concrete understanding of how everything works. So you have more money to spend. Should you spend it on TV? No. And the reason is because you're already saturated on TV. I'm making this up, right? And you'd be better off spending somewhere else where, your ROI is higher and you have more upside.
Right.
In terms of the MTA and MMM coming together, that's actually one of my slides, right? So the future is these things converging. And I'm going to be honest, no one's really 100% there yet. Right now, there are people doing things called unified marketing measurement, but underneath it, there's typically multiple models kind of underpinning the solution. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with having an ensemble models that together explain the totality of what it is that needs explaining. But this needs to be the future, because to ask advertisers to get sort of two versions of the truth is not reasonable, right? If you're doing MTA and you're doing MMM and you're getting slightly different answers, and sometimes it converges and sometimes it doesn't, that's really, really difficult to apply to your day-to-day business decisions that you need to make. And so that's where I would encourage a productive conversation with your agency about really how to bring these things together in a way that's more sensible, if that's not sort of your reality today. These things are really sitting in different places. That's challenging to work with.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. And I am going to be a little critical here. So challenges to MMM and MTA, and you're already sort of articulating some of these things, right? With MMMs, they're often described as a mix of art and science, and there's some people who are sort of skeptical, and that makes them uncomfortable because there's analyst judgment, right? You run a model and there's not one solution, there's many possible solutions that are statistically viable and it's statistically acceptable, but with different implications. And it's typically, a person makes a judgment about which model is the final model. AI and big data are coming in to sort of help with some of that, but again, it does require big data. So I'm not talking about we already think it's big data because it's 3 years of weekly data points. I'm actually talking about daily data, which is a reality in some industries, not so much in CPG. But those sorts of things are helping to make it more turnkey and less sort of judgment dependent. The other knock on MMMs is they often do ignore the brand impact, which again, some suppliers are working to solve, Kantar among them. And MTA requires user level data. It's a challenge sometimes when we have walled gardens, but there are collaborations between publishers and advertisers and agency research suppliers that are sort of getting around some of those obstacles. And I'm conscious that we're at time. So I want to respect your time tonight. My last slide is sort of a little bit of advice as you're navigating your day jobs, how to select sort of tools and partners, and what some of the kind of things that will help you get to a better solution with your agency partner if you're using partners for these tools. I'm happy to, Deb has a copy of this and happy to have it circulated after the class today. Any final thoughts or questions before we adjourn?
I thought that was great.
Great, glad it was helpful.
I don't use any of it, but I was very interested in the brand lift piece of it because I don't use the MTA or MMM one.
No, great. Thank you. Thank you, Patty, so much. We really, really appreciate you sharing all of your knowledge and expertise with us. And for us as a class, this is great. This is our, this is the last assignment for week 7, right? Which is the campaign measurement. So you've got lots of fuel between what Patty has provided and some of the stuff in the videos. And, just remember what are the KPIs you want to solve for, and decide how you want to measure your campaign and what you think the right approaches are. Makes sense for everyone?
Great.
Everybody good? Okay, thank you all. If you have any questions, let me know. I will share everything out either tonight or tomorrow morning. And thank you again for all of your engagement and attention in class. So appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Thanks.
Have a good
Bye.
night.
Thanks.